Drew or Tommy for the New York Giants if Daniel Jones is benched? I'll discuss that and more coming up next on the Locked On Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the Locked On Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast family, your team every day. I'm your host, Patricia Traina, credential member of the New York Giants media for Locked On, as well as for New York Giants on SI, which is where you can find all my written work. And as always, a big welcome on into my everydayers, my Blue Crew community members, to my newcomers, and everybody in between. Thank you for making part of your day or spending part of your day with us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. It is appreciated. And today's episode of the Locked On Giants podcast is brought to you by Prize Picks, the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use our promo code LockedOnNFL in all lowercase letters to win $50 instantly when you play just $5. Don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonuses. It's guaranteed. Prize Picks, run your game. All right, on today's Locked On Giants podcast, look, I think we can all agree that the Giants are going to bench Daniel Jones. I mean, I think it would just be an absolute upset if he is the starter when they come out of the bye. So now the question becomes, who is the best option for the Giants moving forward? Is it going to be Drew Lock or is it going to be Tommy DeVito? And we'll kind of weigh out the pros and cons of each, and we'll start the show off there. Then in segment 2, Schoen and Daboll, got to talk about them. You know, yesterday there were questions about their job security, and Joe Schoen gave the impression, if you will, that he is on solid ground. But how solid is the ground underneath him? And how solid is the ground underneath Brian Daboll? So we'll talk about that in segment 2. And then finally, I want to talk a little bit about Malik Nabers and his rookie season. And, you know, I was doing a little bit of research, statistical stuff for a piece that we were doing over on New York Giants on SI. And there was just a couple of things that kind of jumped out at me that I want to talk about. And they're not Malik Nabers' fault per se. I think it's more of a result of the coaching and the play design, but just certain things that just, when I found them, I was like, what are they doing here? So that, ladies and gentlemen, is our plan for today's show. Again, welcome on in, and thank you for your continued support of the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, Drew or Tommy, who's it going to be if Daniel Jones is benched? Okay, first off, folks, I think it's a given that Daniel Jones is headed to the bench. I would be absolutely floored, as I think so would the rest of the sports world and the fan base, if Daniel Jones is the quarterback coming out of the bye week. So who of Drew Lock or Tommy DeVito makes the most sense for the Giants moving forward? Now, I think a lot of people are automatically assuming that because Drew Lock is next up on the depth chart, it's going to be him. And that might very well be the case. But I think there is a slight chance that we see Tommy DeVito instead of Drew Lock. And I'm going to give you a couple of reasons why I think that might be. First off, the consistency. Now, disclaimer, I have not seen the quarterbacks in practice. All right. The media is allowed in season to attend like the first 20 minutes or so, which is basically warm-ups and individual drills, and then we're kicked out. So we don't get to see the full practice like we would back in training camp. So I just remember from training camp that Drew Lock was often inconsistent. We saw that in the preseason game. We saw that in the Philadelphia game when he came in for Daniel Jones. You know, Brian Daboll mentioning that he was looking for Drew Lock to ignite a spark. That didn't happen. So the inconsistency, I think, is just as maddening with Drew Lock, or has the potential to be just as maddening with Drew Lock as it has been for Daniel Jones. Now, here's another thing to take into consideration. Brian Daboll's offense kind of relies a little bit on the mobility of a quarterback. And I don't think we can honestly say that Drew Lock has the type of mobility of, say, a Daniel Jones. a guy who's going to be able to, make plays with his legs. I think Tommy DeVito might just have a little bit better mobility than Drew Lock would. All right. The other thing I want to point out about the quarterbacks is this. The Giants, if they bench Daniel Jones, and again, I do think that's going to be what they end up doing, they're going to probably need a bridge quarterback. All right. I don't think, it's guaranteed that they're going to draft one in the first round next year, despite what a lot of people think. I don't think that's a slam dunk. It's still early. Obviously, we have to see what the final draft order looks like. But even if the Giants are like top 3, I don't know necessarily if that's going to be what they end up doing. We don't know if maybe the Giants are going to trade for a quarterback or sign a veteran in free agency. We just don't know. There's a lot of unknowns right now. But here's what I think is safe to say, that if Brian Daboll is the head coach next year, and I do believe he will be, although I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next segment, Daboll's probably going to want continuity in the quarterback room. So whether that's re-signing Drew Lock, who is going to be an unrestricted free agent, or sticking with Tommy DeVito and re-signing him because he's going to be an ERFA, which is an exclusive rights free agent, I suspect one of those guys will be back. Now, does it make sense to bring back DeVito, who will probably cost a little less than Drew Lock next year, and use some of that money, which, remember, if they cut Daniel Jones, they're going to get hit for an extra $11.1 million on the dead money ledger. So does it make sense to go with DeVito, who has now been here the longest outside of Daniel Jones amongst the quarterbacks? Possibly. I can see an argument for that. Or do you re-sign Drew Lock, who's probably going to want a contract similar to what he got this year, plus some? And for those who missed it, Drew Lock signed a 1-year, $5 million contract that has up to $3 million in playtime incentives, which means next year he's probably going to cost a lot more than, what he's technically costing the Giants this year. So what do you do? Well, if you're looking at Drew Lock or Tommy DeVito to be a bridge quarterback, maybe you say to yourself, okay, you know what? If we do end up drafting a quarterback, we go with the lesser, the less expensive option, just to kind of, keep the seat warm until the kid's ready. But there's also the argument that you can say, well, you go with Drew Lock because he's the veteran and he can help, a rookie, if that's the path you go, with, getting acclimated. So there's certainly that option. And then, of course, there's another door that we can look behind. And that is, do the Giants maybe scrap both of them and bring in a different quarterback? I don't think that will be the way they go, because, again, I get the impression that Brian Daboll prefers to have continuity in the quarterback room, which means somebody's got to kind of remain behind that knows the system, that can help a new quarterback learn the system and just kind of guide that person, until they get fully acclimated and comfortable within the system. So these are some of the decisions and some of the factors I think that the Giants have to consider. And then, of course, there's the important one. Who's going to help them win games? Now, I can hear it now. Some of you are saying, forget about winning. Tank, get the draft pick. Folks, I keep telling you this. The Giants are not going to tank. No matter how hard you scream or how loud you scream, they're not going to tank. They have to win games. All right. Brian Daboll, as I will talk about in the next segment, has got to win some games if he wants to be back here next year. All right. So they're not going to throw the integrity of the game. It's just not going to happen, despite what you think. So which of the two quarterbacks, Drew or Tommy, gives them the best option to win? Well, Tommy DeVito has shown he can win games. He beat the Packers last year, as everybody remembers. Drew Lock has shown that he can win games. But again, it comes down to consistency. It also could come down to finances. Because as I mentioned, and I had this article up on New York Giants on SI if anybody wants to check it out, Drew Lock could potentially cost the Giants a little bit more than what they anticipated. And this Giant team doesn't have a lot in terms of cap money. So that's going to be a factor, I think, in determining which quarterback they go with. Shouldn't be the only factor. It shouldn't be a big factor, but it is going to be part of the overall evaluation and the overall picture that I'm sure that, Daboll and Shane and the rest of the Giants front office staff and coaching staff are discussing. Now, if I had to pick which of the two I would go with, believe it or not, I think I would go with DeVito. I would definitely go with DeVito, the younger guy. Look, the season's lost anyway. Okay. They may not win another game despite how hard they try, but see what else you've got in DeVito. See what kind of progress he has made. He hasn't played all season long. He's always been the emergency quarterback. See what kind of progress he has made and determine if, is he worth bringing back next year? You pretty much kind of know what you've got in Drew Lock at this point. And when you reach this point in the season where you're basically your campaign is lost because you've been so bad, look at what you've got for the future. And yes, that includes the quarterback position, which we all know is going to get fortified one way or another. But also see what you got that you can maybe carry over into next year to continue and give yourself something of a starting point if you need it. All right, coming up next, Shane and Daboll. Are they on solid ground, or just where exactly do they stand, and what has to happen over the last 7 games to maybe change or affect their standings? We will talk about that right after this. Hey, Giant fans, time is our most precious commodity, so don't waste it scrolling through the same mind numbing content for hours and hours. How can you spend it wisely to improve yourself? Our sponsor, Hillsdale College, is offering more than 40 free, that's right, free online courses, including literature, mathematics, fine arts, history, economics, and so much more. There's no better way to expand your knowledge and to challenge your mind than to open it to Hillsdale College's vast catalog of online courses. Enroll today for free at hillsdale.edu/lockedon. There's no cost and it's easy to get started. That's hillsdale.edu/lockedon to register. Hey, Giant fans, get ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if they win. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more, all on the very same page where you place your bets. Visit FanDuel.com to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Again, that's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And folks, coming up tomorrow night, Friday night, 7:30, we're back with Locked On Giants Live. Now, unfortunately, Bad Dog is not going to be able to join us. He's got the Lakers and stuff. And guys, how he broadcasts Laker games and, talks about like Lakers games and whatnot. But the entertainer will be joining me. So I'm excited to get back with him on a live stream. We will kick things off 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and we'll see how long we go. We'll go at least an hour, hour and a half, possibly 2. You never know. So make sure you join us, bring your questions. And it's been a long time, and boy, do we have a lot to talk about the direction of this team. So that's coming up tomorrow on the Locked On Giants podcast. All right, let's talk about Shane and Daboll. Now, there are the majority of the people I think out there support the idea of Joe Schoen returning because look, when Joe Schoen was hired, he inherited a mess. The salary cap was a disaster. The foundation of the team was just absolutely wrecked. And it's taken him now 3 years to start to rebuild that with young players, with young talent. There are still some pieces missing, but basically, let him continue building it because it looks like right now with this latest crop of rookies that he brought in, that the Giants are headed in the right direction. All right. Now, there's also the argument that people will make to say that Schoen should be fired because, he misfired on some of the free agents like Saquon Barkley, like Xavier McKinney, like Julian Love. He misfired on the decision to re-sign Daniel Jones when he should have maybe picked up the option year of his rookie deal. Schoen's made mistakes. Let's not sit here and say that everything he has done has been the right move. There's questions about his first couple of drafts in that his drafts haven't really produced any all-pro type players, whereas Dave Gettleman at least managed to get an all-pro out of Andrew Thomas and Dexter Lawrence. So there are valid arguments to both sides of the coin. But here's the thing, and I will continue to say this until, I see otherwise. You cannot keep turning over the GM every so many years because, look, every GM does things a little differently. Every GM has their guys in conjunction with the head coach. And do you really want to have to start over with a head coach and a new GM and a new quarterback? Now, some of you are going to say, well, it worked for Washington, didn't it? Yeah, it did. But I don't get the impression that John Mara wants to go down that path. And, while I have said in the past that that was the way to go, I also think that the Giants had their chance now twice to do that. The first time being when Tom Coughlin left. I felt that they should have just swept everybody out, and that included Eli Manning. They could have done it again when, they hired Schoen and Daboll. They could have swept out Daniel Jones, but they didn't. So the Giants now twice have missed out on that opportunity. So that said, Schoen has started to build up this team. And I don't know that they're necessarily one draft class away or one free agent class away. But when he says that they're headed in the right direction, I don't think he means in terms of overall the program, but I think he's talking in terms of the foundation of the team. And I know that's hard to see and to embrace right now, given the record. But can we all agree that this last draft class that he had is probably his best to date? And there's a lot of promise there and a lot that he can build on. Can we all agree that, for the most part, Bobby Okereke, Brian Burns, Jermaine Illuminor, John Runyon Jr., that those have been solid free agent signings? So, this team has holes, no question about it. But the foundation is a lot better now than it was maybe under the previous GM. So I do think that barring something really wacky happening, Joe Schoen will be back and deserves to be back. Now, let's talk about Brian Daboll. Daboll, I think, hit the ground underneath him. I don't think he's standing on cement like Schoen is. I think Daboll's kind of standing on broken concrete, if you will. And I say that because there are mistakes, just like Schoen has made mistakes in his job, Daboll has made some mistakes in his job. All right. We can look at my pet peeve, which is how he distributes playtime in the preseason, which I do not agree with. We can look at, the structure of practices. We can look at any number of things, the coaching decisions that he's made, and so on and so forth. But that being said, again, you have to give the guy some time. And I think if the Giants don't win another game this season, which I guess you could say is a possibility, I think at that point, if you're the Giants, you gotta really think about a switch here. And it's not something that you want to have to do because, again, we talk about continuity. And look, the best example I can give you as to why you don't want to keep making switches, look at the defense. All right. Now, by that, I mean Dane Belton and Deonte Banks had very specific skill sets and they were drafted for what Wink Martindale ran. All right. So Wink Martindale, resigns in a huff. They bring in Shane Bowen, who has a totally different philosophy. And now what happens? Now, all of a sudden, Deonte Banks doesn't look so good, does he? Or Dane Belton can't get on the field. So extend that now to the entire team. You bring in a new coach, and now maybe some of the guys that the previous coach was high on, maybe those guys are afterthoughts. Then again, maybe some of the guys that the previous coach wasn't high on, like the Jalen Hyatts, for example, or the Daniel Bellingers, maybe those guys get a second chance. So, I mean, you have to weigh your options there. But with Daboll, I think if you're going to bring him back regardless, and I do think he needs to win at least a couple games to really solidify his footing. But if you bring him back, I think you have to do a couple things with him, or you have to mandate a couple things with him. Number one, I think you have to tell him, Brian, we don't want you calling plays anymore. Now, again, I know when he initially announced it, I said, oh, it's a great idea. It makes all the sense in the world. It hasn't worked out. The Giants, we're seeing far too many procedural penalties and screw ups and whatnot. Some of the play calling is questionable. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that and give you some examples in the next segment when I talk about Malik Nabers. So you have to just say, hey, Brian, let's rethink you calling the plays. We need you to be more of an overall CEO, because there's just too many things, decisions that I think Daboll leans on his staff that he should be making as the head coach. And that concerns me. Now, here's the thing, though. Brian Daboll's argument for keeping the play calling, if they draft a young quarterback, he could turn around and say, well, y'all saw what I did with Josh Allen when the Bills drafted him. Give me the opportunity to do the same thing with whoever, the quarterback is. It's a possibility. But I think that the play calling and just having somebody else do it, whether it's Kafka, if he's back next year, which, by the way, I don't think he is, or giving it to Shea Tierney, I think that's something you have to consider if you're the Giants. So in sum, I think Daboll is on shakier ground than Joe Schoen. That said, if I were a betting woman, which I'm really not, but if I were, I would say both guys are back next year. And I know what John Maris said, but look, this is a results-oriented business, and that's where you have to really, earn your keep. You can't just keep giving guys infinite number of tries and expect things to change. Look at what they did with the quarterback. They kept giving him try after try after try, and look at where we're at today. So, all right, coming up next, I was doing some research. I came across some head-scratching stuff about Malik Nabers and his deployment, how he's been utilized, and I'm going to talk about that with you right after this. Hey, Giant fans, Prize Picks is the best place to get real money sports action. With over 10 million members and billions of dollars in awarded winnings, Prize Picks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more or less on at least 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash. Ask yourself which players are going to go off, which ones aren't. Make your picks in less than 60 seconds and turn your sports opinions into real money all season long. And be sure to check out Prize Picks' weekly promotions that can lead to big payouts like Taco Tuesday, when every Tuesday Prize Picks discounts select player projections up to 25% to provide even more value for your lineups. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. So what are you waiting for? Download the app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Prize Picks. Run your game. All right, Giant fans, welcome back to the Locked On Giants podcast. I'm your host, Patricia Traina. And in this segment, I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine, and we were talking about some of the play calls and schemes that Brian Daboll was running. And one of the topics that came up was their deployment of Malik Nabers. And if the Giants are truly getting what they signed up for with Malik Nabers. So I went off and I did some research. And here's what I found, and this is according to Next Gen Stats. Overall, though, the Giants, I don't think, are deploying Nabers to get the most out of his talents. All right. So, for example, his yards after the catch, +5 over expected. But here's a really alarming stat, I think. His air yards per target, the average air yards per target, 10.4. This guy is a deep threat. He is capable of stretching the defense, and he's not being sent on more deep routes. All right. Even if you send him on a deep route as a decoy, at least give the defense something to think about. All right. We know that, chances are Daniel Jones wasn't going to hit the deep routes. We know all about that, but you still got to give them something to think about. And I was just amazed that, Malik Nabers is only averaging 10.4 air yards per target. This is a guy who could stretch the field, for heaven's sakes, and I don't think that they're taking advantage of that. Now, it just so happens that Malik Nabers is at his best on those deep routes. He is +5 yards after catch over expected on those deep routes, but he is +1 on short routes and -1 on intermediate routes. And guess what he's been running mostly, folks? Yep, intermediate routes. So again, I don't know that they're fully taking advantage of what he brings to the table. All right. The other thing that they're doing with Malik Nabers, and this is a pet peeve of mine, and it's not just Malik, it's all the receivers, it seems. They're running him short of the sticks. I have said this so many times. There is no reason why, if you have, say, 2nd and 6, there is no reason to run a 5-yard route, one yard short of the sticks. Get to the sticks, make sure you've got the first down, and then whatever you pick up in terms of yak is gravy. So we see this a lot with Nabers, and probably because, they feel that he's elusive, that he's quick, that he has the speed and the breakaway ability. And, what's 1 yard? He can make that up easily. Well, it's not as simple as it seems, especially when, all this time you've had a quarterback who, when he throws the ball, a lot of times he can't hit the receiver in stride, that the receivers have to stop to catch the ball, or they have to come back to the ball. And how many times have we seen instances where they have stopped or come back to the ball, and a defensive player who was initially 5 or more yards away comes zooming in and limits the yak? So that's really frustrating to watch, and that's something I think needs to change. Now, another thing with Malik Nabers, interesting here, is motion. When Malik Nabers is in motion, and he's only been in motion on 30 of his 94 pass targets, again, this per Next Gen Stats, he has a +26 receiving EPA and 127 yards after the catch. Now, look, you can't put him in motion every play. I get that. But 30 plays out of 94 targets, got to do a little bit better than that, wouldn't you say? And plus, by putting him in motion, that helps the quarterback determine what the defense is looking to do. So I'm not sure I fully understand the thinking behind that as well. But, it's interesting because, people look at Malik Nabers and they say, well, is he really giving the Giants what they signed up for? He's not, but I don't think it's his fault. I think it's, because of the system he's in. I think it's because of the philosophy of the coaching. I think that's all a factor. And, look, you've got this tremendous receiver. Why not deploy him to his fullest potential? It doesn't make sense. And that's one of many coaching decisions, by the way, that I don't understand what the coaches are thinking, what Daboll is thinking. But, those topics, that's for another time. But I wanted to talk about Nabers because, like I said, I went off and I did this research on that one. I don't have all the data and research on the other ones. I just have theories, but we'll talk about that another time, I'm sure. But anyway, folks, that's going to do it for us here on the Locked On Giants podcast. I do want to thank you for spending part of your day with us here during this bye week. Hope you enjoyed the program. Hope you enjoyed all our programming. And don't forget, tomorrow we are going live with Tana. So it'll be just Trina and Tana tomorrow. Hope we will see you. That'll be 7:30 tomorrow on the Locked On Giants podcast channel. Until then, everybody, have a great one. I'll see you then.